Hey everyone, on today's second stimulus check update, Adine and I talk about how to get $1,000 if you have not gotten it yet. Yes, you have to qualify for it, but at the beginning of the video, we talk all about it, and at the end, we answer FAQs to let you know, do you qualify or not? Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Second Round Stimulus Check Updates. I'm Logan.
Hey, what's up everyone? Adine over here.
So Adine, let's go ahead and kick it on off with the EIDL grant. So effectively, this puts $1,000 back into some people's pockets relatively quickly. So break down what this means for people and how do they go about actually getting their $1,000?
Yeah, Logan, so this is part of the original stimulus bill that came out to support small businesses, to keep them in business, keep their employees on payroll. And it's through the SBA. So in the original CARES Act, what was supposed to happen is there was what they call a streamlined application. It takes about 15 minutes to fill out and asks most of your basic information about your business and the owners. And then it asks how many employees do you have. Once you put all that stuff in, you're supposed to get funded $1,000 per employee in your bank account. Up to $10,000 is the max in your bank account within 48 hours. And what's happened is at the front end, everybody applied. It took them a lot longer to fund that money, but they finally did, which is great. Most everybody got the EIDL grant. A lot of people are now getting EIDL loans. And then there was an in-between phase where they shut down the application. There was still money in there. They shut down the application and then only opened it to agricultural businesses. So trying to support our farmers, make sure that they get access to funding. They've done all of that now, and there's still money left. And so now they're reopening that streamlined application for small businesses to go. And the easiest thing to do is if you go to sba.gov, so Small Business Administration.gov, there's going to be a link all the way at the top, says, you know, for grant money, for stimulus money, click here, and it'll take you straight to that application.
Now, let's say you drive Uber and you're a gig worker where you just had side cash, and because now that that's gone, you don't have that. Can you apply for this?
You can apply to it. The idea was that the EIDL grants are still meant for people who are still in business. So what you want to be careful with is if you are collecting unemployment and that's $600 a week off of your Uber gig, unfortunately, legally you're not supposed to also get the EIDL grant. I've making no legal statements here. If you apply and you get it, that's on you in terms of how you want to handle the back end. But the idea was one or the other. Either you stay in business and you get the grant and then you apply for the loan, or you go on unemployment and you forget about this EIDL grant.
So maybe if you're like at that in-between stage where you're like, you can get back to work, you see stuff's opening back up, people are actually starting to call Uber again or buy, you know, from your online store or whatever it is, you get yourself off unemployment, you get your $1,000, and then you're back off into the workforce effectively.
Yeah, but it just doesn't make sense. If you're getting unemployment, you're getting $2,400 a month. Why would you trade that in for $1,000? So you're better off not worrying about the EIDL grant to stay on unemployment through July 31st. And then after that, I mean, they keep talking about doing some sort of transition unemployment. But wait it out, figure that part out. You're going to get a lot more out of the unemployment side than you are with this EIDL grant.
Okay, so even though the EIDL grant is back online, unless you're a small business still operational, it really makes more sense if you're currently on unemployment just to stay on unemployment through at least the end of July, because you're going to continue to make more money that way instead of trying, get your $1,000 and then you're back, and yeah.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. So speaking of new jobs and getting back into the workforce, we have President Trump coming out and talking about $1 trillion stimulus. This is not from McConnell. This is not from Pelosi. This is from President Trump himself. $1 trillion stimulus towards infrastructure. So Adine, what does this mean?
So Logan, if we go back to 2016 when Trump ran on this big platform of making America great again, getting jobs back in the country, one of his big promises was infrastructure spending. So we've known, again, for 2 to 3 decades that our roads aren't great. We've known that our bridges aren't safe. In the last 10 years, we've had several news stories where bridges have collapsed. And so this is a way for the federal government to say, look, we know the states don't have any funding to go out there and do massive spending on roads and bridges. So this is very big for many reasons, right? So at the top, obviously this $1 trillion mark is huge. Two, it's a campaign promise that Trump made 4 years ago. And again, now we're in an election year. It's going to come back up.
So with this, is it just roads, bridges, things like that? Or is it also like other infrastructure? So it could be ports, it could be airports, things like that.
Absolutely, all of those. So you got ports, you got airports. You're going to have warehouse types of spaces. So as we're moving more stuff. And I think we talked about also his huge goal about bringing manufacturing back in the U.S. So in order to do the manufacturing here and then being able to get everything out to the people, you need to have the infrastructure to be able to move those goods. And so I don't think they're going to go back to fixing up railroads and stuff like that. But if they fix up the roads and they do it in a very strategic manner, the other thing that you got to think about is all this technology that we're creating right now. And you think about Tesla trucks. You think about all the cameras that we're putting on everything. Being able to then have these new roads with some technology behind the wheel in terms of moving stuff around, it's going to mean a completely different game for supply chain. And again, it does help his whole big goal of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.
Now, this sounds a lot like the New Deal, which was how they re-stimulated the economy after the Great Depression 100 years ago, where they just like put a bunch of, they opened up a bunch of infrastructure jobs and just put people to work that way.
Yeah, it's again, it's another piece to that. So there's always, with everything that we've talked about in our videos, is there's always a domino effect. It's not just one thing in isolation. There's also other effects that happen from it. So one of the big ones with this is obviously jobs, right? And they're going to be good paying jobs. Most people who work on road construction, port construction and stuff like that tend to make well over $20 an hour. Plus, in a lot of these situations, especially if it goes through the Department of Transportation, if you are now a federal employee, if you now get federal benefits, you get federal health insurance, it all adds up. So it's a big deal, whether you want to call it a new deal, a big deal, in terms of stimulating the economy, getting jobs to people, getting money to people, and ultimately making all of our lives easier through better infrastructure. This is a very critical component of his whole platform. Plus, what we won't hear in the news is if we go back, and we've talked about Nancy Pelosi's CARES Act, okay? We've talked about, or I'm sorry, HEROES Act.
Yeah.
She wanted $1 trillion to go to state and local governments. So if we go and give state and local governments $1 trillion, a big part of that money would have gotten spent on infrastructure as well. So this is another way of playing that game where it's not, okay, HEROES Act, $1 trillion is going to the states. It's, hey, look, we're going to isolate $1 trillion, give it to infrastructure spending. Whether the feds control it or they give the control to the states, we'll see. But that's where it's going with this.
Plus, as it being an election year, it puts President Trump's name back on the bill versus Pelosi, which was kind of like, I think when he was sending out like the stimulus checks for the first round, I think he was like personally, like he had like his own signature on the check. And they like, I think they passed a bill that said like, you may not do this anymore because it was, you know, it positions him unfairly where it's like he's the one stepping in directly and doing all this. So I know that was a bone of contention between both sides of Congress when that was first starting to come out. So, okay, so it's effectively taking what Pelosi was talking about with her act, which ironically was what the Republicans were very against. You know, it was both unemployment, but also giving money to state and local governments. But it sounds like now they're going to be doing the same job, but just from a federal level.
Yeah, again, I don't know how it's going to shake out in terms of how the money flows. With programs like this, usually the feds approve it, and they will send it down to the states because the feds don't have enough manpower, women power to manage this sort of program across 50 states. So what they'll do is they'll set rules of the game in terms of how the states can apply for this money, and then the federal government's going to give grants to the states and say, okay, we approve this project, we approve that project, we don't like this project over here. And then the states have to figure out, okay, are they going to do it internally or are they going to subcontract it out? Again, try and being efficient, try to save money and all of that stuff. So we'll see how it shakes out in terms of implementation, but overall $1 trillion towards infrastructure is really good.
And then on the Federal Reserve came out and talked about how they're going to now buy corporate bonds. So from a very high level, what does this mean?
Right, so what we've seen is the stock market last week had one of its worst weeks since probably March. And a lot of it was people feeling jittery and anxious about all these programs ending here in the next few weeks. And one of the concerns is, okay, people's PPP money is running out. You have corporations who are trying to figure out, okay, how do we shift our business model? Are we going to even close down some stores? We've seen a lot of retail stores shut down.
I think 24 Hour Fitness just announced yesterday that they're declaring bankruptcy. So gyms are starting to go too.
So that's kind of a big issue. So now what they're saying is, okay, well, the Federal Reserve is tired of waiting for Congress to pass any sort of meaningful legislation. So they're saying, look, if you're a company and you have to be a publicly traded company, so you got to be very big. They're saying if you need access to money, you can go and you can issue bonds in the market, and you're going to have investors buying them. Now, bonds from companies tend to have higher interest rate for the companies because they're more risky than, for example, the federal government, treasury bonds. And so what now happens is if a 10-year bond from the government gives you 0.7% in interest, usually that corporate bond will give you a couple percent more, so 2.7%. And now with the Federal Reserve buying these bonds, so demand goes up, what happens is that price, that interest rate is going to come down. So in essence, it makes borrowing money way cheaper for companies. And the full idea is, again, if borrowing is cheap, if I can go and borrow money for 10 years at 1.5% to 2%, I can take that money and I can invest it in the business. I can invest it in basically getting better at what I'm doing, innovating, figuring out new technologies. And ultimately what the real goal is, although we'll see if it happens, is, again, employment. Can we take this money? Can we borrow money cheaply, 1.5%, and hire 1, 2, 10, 100 people? And hopefully by hiring people, we're going to have higher sales, we're going to have more profits, and it all works out for everybody. So that's the big goal here.
So all of this stuff is really trying to get people back to work.
In essence, right. It's trying, because everything we've always read and seen, people want to be at work. People don't want to be sitting at home, but they also need to earn a certain amount of money to pay their bills. And so that's kind of the big issue with this unemployment situation. But if we can get these programs where it's cheap enough for companies to do it, the government's involved vis-a-vis this infrastructure bill or EIDL grant money, and then we get people back to work, I think everybody's going to be happy, because psychologically, when those job numbers come out and we all have a job and unemployment's low, and we all feel good.
Now, you mind if I ask a couple questions about the EIDL? I just want to make sure that I'm exactly clear. So you can't get unemployment and get the EIDL grant, correct?
So it's more complicated than that, right? So EIDL grant is for businesses, and the application is going to ask you how many employees do you have. If you're self-employed like that Uber driver, you have one employee, which is yourself. So now if you're taking the EIDL grant, it implies that you're working. And so if you're working, you should not be on unemployment. And so it's a full circle relationship between the two. So if you're going over here and applying for EIDL, you're in business, you're trying to work, you're trying to stay alive, you should not be on unemployment.
Now, what if you are, like, your main job, like you have a normal W-2, but then you have like a side gig of Uber where you're still trying to do that, so you're technically full-time W-2, but then part-time Uber, which I'm guessing is just a 1099. Can 1099 qualify for this?
1099s can, so I mean, it doesn't matter if you have that full-time job or not in terms of EIDL grant. as long as you qualify for all the other stipulations. So again, you got to read the application. Don't just put your name and social security number on stuff. But yes, if your side hustle, if you have your main job and your side hustle is struggling, you're not on unemployment, then you can apply for the EIDL grant.
Okay, so if you do have a side hustle, which it seems like a lot of people these days do,
yeah,
you have a good chance, or you are able to apply for this and get it.
Correct.
And then are they just taking the finite amount of money that they still had left over after agriculture came in, and that's what they're distributing? So there's
That's
not,
it.
there's not like an endless amount of money for this. You should get on this and apply right now.
Correct. Again, make sure that you actually qualify to apply for it. If you do, yes, go and apply. Get your $1,000, or depending on how many employees you have, whatever it is. Again, and also remember, employee means W-2 employee. So I know a lot of people, especially in contracting world, subcontract work out to 1099s. So if I'm a GC and I have 5 people who I 1099, I cannot count those 5 towards my employee count.
What, and have they said anything about if you got the first round of EIDL grants, can you reapply?
You cannot. So
okay,
it's a
so
one-time
if you already get it
deal.
once, you're out.
Correct.
All right, so it's not as groundbreaking as when I was reading it and learning about it as I thought.
Well, so you got to go back to the beginning of all of this. We had it come out. The EIDL grant application was the first thing that launched. It launched before PPP. Everybody applied. The system crashed. And then we were all in a waiting period. Nobody got money for about 3 weeks. It was supposed to be funded within 48 hours. Nobody heard a thing for 3 weeks. And so we ran out of money. Then we had the second round get passed, which refilled the bucket. And it's also when people thought that PPP was going to run out. And so this is all of that now playing out, where they finally figured out who's gotten it in the first round, who's applied multiple times that they have to scratch off the list. And now they wanted to take care of the agricultural people. And now we have some more money left over, which also full circle PPP. There's still some money left there. I haven't seen the most recent figures, but if you haven't gotten either one of them, there's still a chance to get them.
Cool. All right, guys, so there you go. So some big updates. EIDL grants are opening up for people outside of agriculture. So if you have not gotten your $1,000 yet and you qualify, go ahead and apply. We have infrastructure as $1 trillion bill coming at you. And last but not least, make sure that you are up to date with everything. And, as always, hit the subscribe button, and we'll check you guys next time.